Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Living Well or Trying to. I'm your host, Janet. Today's episode is the conversation I had with Kari from Food Friends. This week, we get into eating seasonally, summer produce, hosting dinner parties, and ways to cook healthy meals for yourself and your family. I hope you enjoy. We are deep in summer season, and this time of year, there are lots of delicious seasonal fruits and vegetables. And it's also the time of year when many people might be motivated to eat healthier, to learn to cook from home, to get into some recipes. So I thought today would be a good time to take the opportunity to talk about this. And with me is Kari, who is a chef, a writer, lover of gardening, and she also hosts her own podcast. So check that out. It's with her friend Sonia called Food Friends, where they share their food expertise and also inspire seasonal home cooking. So I'm really excited to get to speak with you today, Kari. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yes. Before we get started in this conversation, I do want to ask you, what is a current wellness practice that you're really into at the moment?
I love that you asked that. And I also really, I love that you use the word practice
Yeah.
because I think, as I get older, I just think the word practice applies to so many things in life.
Yeah.
And those things are kind of always shifting because we're always growing and expanding. But something that I really prioritize right now is sleep. And um, I'm I am a parent of a 9-year-old. I have a partner. We have a very busy life,
Yeah.
and I'm actually more of a night owl. But
Same.
that is not possible for this season of my life.
Oh,
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
I really I've sort of learned over time, once I became a parent, I there's a lot of sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
And I actually got into like a couple of serious car accidents that were my fault because I
Oh,
was so sleep
no.
deprived.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I've sort of found my way into being a better sleeper. And one of the things that I've kind of used is the Aura ring, which it's not a plug. This is not a plug. This
Yeah,
is just like something I
yeah.
came to. And it's really helped me like learn to be a consistent sleeper. Like I usually try to get in bed by 9. I try to go to bed by around 10. I'm usually up
So
around
good.
6. And that's not true for every day.
Yeah.
But if you kind of maintain a sense of consistency, you just get better over time.
Mm.
And I also have become someone who wears an eye mask, which I
Yes,
heard
same.
recently you were sharing about that too. We're now a family that wears eye masks. My son
Oh,
was
he
actually the
does as
first one
well.
who adopted it. And then
Wow.
I started using it, and now my husband does too. But I just think when I sleep well, I can just function so much better.
Yes.
And I also think like sleeping doesn't cost you anything. Like you don't need an
Yeah.
Aura ring, you don't need an eye mask.
Mm.
You just need to be kind to yourself before you go to bed.
Oh, I
And
love that.
so
Yeah.
I think that's just something that makes such a difference for me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I loved how you made it very accessible. It's like if you want to get into it, you can do an Oura ring, you can do a sleep mask, but you can also just be kind to yourself. And I actually had another guest on before you, and her answer was also sleep
Oh
as her main
wow.
practice right now. And her main thing was, being able to unplug for like the 10 to 15 minutes before you go to sleep is the most important to be able to just like relax into it.
Yeah, you're
So,
kind of like setting your body up for that. It's like you don't want to do a workout and then shower and then just run into bed. Like your
yeah,
body,
you're
then your
amped up.
heart is pumping,
Yeah.
and so I think I've definitely learned that through trial and error.
Mm.
And it's funny, I think my parents definitely raised us to have like a very regimented sleep schedule.
Mm.
And then
Yeah.
when I got into college, I just was kind of like, oh, now I'm really a night
Yeah.
person. And then you kind of find your way back to what works for you. And
Mm.
I think part of that was just through parenthood of
Yeah.
just having to be able to function during the day. Um and when they say like when your baby is little and goes to sleep, you should nap too.
Yeah.
And I found that to be really hard because there's
Mm.
so many things to do. And so I just think like the older I get, the more I just really need good sleep to be able to
Yeah.
function. So
Yeah. Thank
yeah.
you for sharing that. We're
Yeah.
definitely, for anyone out there listening, hopefully that echoes for them as well to put that into
It's
practice.
so it's so simple and yet it really does require a lot of effort,
It does, right? I
Yeah.
mean, but beyond sleep, you also are really into like nutrition and cooking, which are also big points of like living well. And you do both, you have an interesting practice in both cooking and nutrition. So I'm curious, like, how did that happen? Which came first? How did you get into all of this?
Well, I think definitely nutrition did not come first. I grew up in the 80s and 90s with like Twinkies and
Oh, yes.
Doritos
Yeah.
and Lunchables in my lunch. And in the 90s, when I was in high school, there's like the fat-free craze.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that, nutrition has really come, I think, a long way.
Yeah.
I'm also not a nutritionist. I'm just very interested in food. And
Yeah.
so, but I think, I grew up in a really small town and in like an agricultural community,
Mm,
a farming community. And my parents both cooked. And
mm,
that's something that I've noticed is consistent with other people who I meet out in the world that are chefs or home cooks.
mm.
There seems to be this familial component of like maybe it was one of their parents, maybe it was their grandparents, or someone around them cooked home cooked meals.
Mm,
And my parents were not fancy cooks. They were very basic. It was a lot of meat and potatoes. We didn't eat any garlic or onions in
mm.
my family. And so it was a very basic, kind of home cooking.
Yeah.
But I think that consistency of like
Mm.
sitting down and eating meals together was something that was a practice in my family. And, and I think as a as a when you get a little bit older and, when you're kind of like a teen, like 13, 12, 13, you realize that if you bake stuff, then you'll be able to have more
Yeah. Or
more
you can make your
desserts.
food
You
that
can make your
your
own
snacks.
food.
Yeah.
And so, I started making chocolate chip cookies or
Mm.
Rice Krispie treats or there's this kind of fun dish called puppy chow, which is basically like Chex cereal, like a
Oh.
crunchy cereal, and then you melt like chocolate chips over it, and then you cover it in powdered sugar,
Oh,
and you can make it in the microwave. Have you heard of
I
this?
have, but when I was growing up, my friends who made it called it Muddy
Muddy
Buddies. Yeah.
Buddies, yes. I just learned actually I learned that from my podcast.
Oh,
We always
yeah.
called it Chex Mix or Puppy Chow.
That's
And
cute.
my partner was like, "Oh yeah, we used to call it Muddy Buddies."
Yeah.
But that was something I could make in the microwave. So
Yeah,
if I
very
came home from
simple.
school, we could make that. And so that was kind of how I started getting interested in cooking
Oh.
and and making some of my family's recipes. One other thing that really made a difference for me was that when I was in high school, the Food Network came onto our cable. And the
Oh,
early days of the Food Network were all instructional. Like all the
like
the shows,
how-tos and
they were all
recipes,
how-to
yeah.
shows. And so I learned how to cook from Emeril Lagasse.
Yeah, I remember
There was
that.
a show called Two Hot Tamales with Mary Sue Milliken and Susan Vinegar, who are two LA-based chefs. They have many restaurants here in LA still. And I still think about Susan Vinegar when I crack eggs because she always gave this tip of you should crack your eggs in a separate bowl in case you lose one of the shells. Like there's no way to know
Oh.
if an egg shell is going to end up in your bowl. So
Yeah.
don't put it into your main recipe. And
Mm.
so I just really that made such a difference. It like helped me see how other people were eating.
Yeah,
And that
yeah.
really opened up my world. And then I also went on a trip to New Orleans when I was 17 on
Oh.
like a church. It was like a bus trip for like a church convention.
Yeah.
And part of the convention was that we got to go to these food demos
Mm.
and seeing these people make like jambalaya and gumbo and
Mm.
these like big pots and all the smells. It really like, it just kind of burst my world open in terms of because I grew up in a family that didn't cook with like onions or garlic. And
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
it just really like kind of led me down this path of wanting to learn how to cook.
That's amazing. So I love that the evolution was from kind of growing up with your family and then being exposed through media to like a wider type of like cooking. Then how did you get to LA? Like what was that? How did that happen?
Well, a job actually brought me out to Los Angeles, and I came here. I lived in Chicago before I moved here,
Yeah.
and I sort of landed on the West Coast, and I really wasn't cooking a lot. It's funny. One of the things I used to do when I was in high school was I used to pull recipes out of magazines,
Mm.
like from like Woman's Day or Gourmet Magazine. My
Yeah,
mom
yeah.
was a teacher at our high school, and so I found this stack of magazines and I started pulling these recipes out and I made all these binders because I
Mm.
was also kind of OCD. And so
Yeah.
I was like, okay,
You're
here's all
making
the
your own cookbooks.
desserts,
Yeah.
here's all the desserts, here's all the, marinaras, here's all this. And so I brought all of those like binders of recipes out with me.
Mm.
But, my first couple of years here, I did not cook a lot because I was kind of busy getting settled in.
Yeah.
And then once I got settled in, I did start cooking again, and I started cooking for like this group of friends that I had made on the West Coast, and that's actually what led me to my first client as a personal chef because I also
Mm.
didn't go to culinary school. is I was friends with this girl who was a nanny, and she said, "This client that I work for is looking for someone to cook for her 3 days a week." She goes, "You're a good cook. You should go cook for her." And I said, "Okay, I'll go interview with her."
Yeah.
And I went to her house on a Sunday morning, and I had a cup of coffee with her. And this lady said to me, "Sophie says you're a good cook." And I said, "Well, I am." And she said, "Okay, I need someone 3 days a week." And I said, "Okay." And that's how my business started.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That
Yeah.
is amazing. I mean, I'm curious about the life of what that's like. Like, so you were cooking for their family 3 days a week. What would a day in your life look like?
Well, they were really an ideal client. It was a mom and two daughters, and we just had such a great energetic connection.
Yeah.
And also my friend she was one of their nannies, and they
Mm.
they sort of had like this group of young, it was just like a young beautiful house of like
Yeah.
energy.
Good place to
And
be around. Yeah.
yeah, and the food was not, they liked tacos and they liked salad and they liked soup, and it was really just well-made
Mm.
basics that people want to eat at home.
Yeah.
I think home cooking is not a tasting menu. That's not what
Mm.
people expect to eat at home. And
Yeah.
so they just wanted like well-made food. And what happened was she entertained a lot, and she
Mm.
would have another family or two other families over, and I would cook dinner for all of us. And that's how I started gaining more clients, is that then her
Mm.
friends would start hiring me. And my business just kept growing from there.
Wow. And I hear that you were also a chef for some celebrities. Is that right?
Yeah, so there was kind of a turning point. My partner, who was then my husband, he went to work at a talent agency,
Mm.
and so as an assistant, like he worked in the mailroom, and then he worked on an
Mm.
agent's desk. And so once he started working at the talent agency, then, a lot of our friends who were assistants, they were like, "Oh, Weaver's girlfriend, she's a
Oh,
chef."
yeah.
And one of the heads of the agency hired me. And so I actually worked for a lot of agents. I worked for producers and writers and, you know, big names I think that some people would know. But, recently Sonia and I recorded an episode about cooking with summer strawberries.
Yeah.
And in that episode, I mentioned that I did cook for Barbara Streisand a couple of times.
Wow.
I was introduced to her, and the reason it came out in the strawberry episode is that I was introduced to her. Someone gave her my phone number. She called me. Barbara Streisand called my phone, and we had this really long, beautiful conversation about all the things that she likes to eat. And we decided to do a dinner party together. And she said, "I really love those French strawberries, like the really fragrant ones. And
Mm.
I like to dip them in sugar and then in like creme fraiche or sour
Mm.
cream." And so we put that on the menu. And that was one of the sort of recipes that we talked about on this strawberry episode, is that if you find those like really special strawberries, you don't
Mm.
want to cook them, you don't want to mess with them. You just want to, eat them raw with maybe a little bit of sugar and a little bit of creme
Yeah.
fraiche.
Oh my
So,
gosh. I
yeah.
love that. I love that you were able, well, first that she called your phone.
Yes. Yes, she's a real food lover. It
Yeah.
was a very fun conversation. It was a really fun dinner at her house.
Yeah.
And she has this incredible garden as well. So part of our deal was that she said I could come out and harvest
Oh,
like
amazing.
all these vegetables from her garden, and then I cooked with them too, which was really special.
Wow. And
Yeah.
was that for that like one event or was this kind of an ongoing?
Yeah, I cooked for her a couple of times, and but she lives in Malibu, so it was very far from like I
Yeah.
cooked a lot on the west side. I was a lot in Brentwood and the
Mm.
Palisades, but Malibu's like it's a
It's a
jaunt,
trek. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. So
I mean, when you're cooking, are you cooking like it sounds like it's very integrated into the person's life. You're getting to know them. Sometimes you're harvesting from their gardens. Are you cooking in their kitchen? You're spending time with them versus kind of it's not like you preparing at home and then bringing them food.
yeah, they're all different. All personal chefs kind of have a different way that they work,
Mm.
but my most favorite way of cooking with my clients was, I would go there 1 or 2 days a week, and, some clients maybe 3 days a week, but I was really just there to make a meal and maybe leave a couple of meals depending on
Mm.
what they needed. I definitely had other friends that would like cook in kitchens, or they would go to someone's house 1 day a week and make like 6 meals and put them in,
Mm.
containers and leave them in the fridge. But I was very much more integrated into people's lives,
Mm.
and I preferred that. I was a personal chef mostly in my 20s, and it was before I was married, before I had my own child,
Mm.
and I was still very new to LA.
Yeah.
So, especially with my first client, it was almost like an extension of family.
Mm.
And, you know, people treated me that way to the point where, there was this family I worked for many years ago, and their kids were 8 and 10 when I met them. And now my son is 9, and the 10-year-old, who is a boy, is now lives in New York, and he has a fiance. And he
Mm.
was here visiting recently, and he like went to the batting cages with my son and like taught
Oh,
him how to bat better because, this kid played baseball in high school and college. And
yeah.
so it's like I'm still very close to a lot of my clients, which is
Yeah.
really nice.
I love that there's
Yeah.
that connection that you have.
Yeah.
I mean, beyond the story with like Barbara Streisand and the strawberries, are there any other kind of like really memorable events that you've cooked for, or like clients that you had, or anything that kind of stands out?
Yeah, there was a family that I worked for a few years ago. The wife was like the head of a studio. The husband was a comedian. They had 3 kids. They had 4 dogs. It was like a really fun house to work in,
Yeah.
and I loved cooking for them. It was a really creative challenge. But one of the things that happened when I was working for them is that she gifted me to one of her like writer friends as like
Mm.
a birthday present, and so I talked to this guy and he was like, "Oh, I want to have a dinner party." And so we made a menu and agreed on a day. And I went to his house, and the person who opened the door was kind of like his house manager.
Mhm.
And his name was John. And so he showed me into the kitchen, and, I started like turning on the ovens and getting out all my stuff. And he kind of plopped down in the kitchen and he just kept talking to me. And kind of by the end of the night, he said to me, I really have to introduce you to my friend. I really want you
Oh,
to meet
wow.
my ex-girlfriend. You have to meet this girl. And, he was so adamant about it. I agreed to it.
Yeah.
And that was my partner, Sonia. He
Whoa.
has this gift of connecting people. And so
Yeah.
he introduced me to her. She and I have known each other for over 15 years. And when we first met, it was more just like she also worked as a personal chef. I worked as a personal chef. We would share jobs. If I had a dinner party I couldn't do, I would give them her number or
Mm.
vice versa. And our friendship really grew over time. We would call each other and, talk about recipes.
Yeah.
And, it was just such an unexpected, that was part of what was so nice about being in these groups of people is
Yeah.
like it was a lot of sharing among friends,
Yeah.
and people really treated me really well because I came from their friend. And so
Mm.
it was such a gift.
It was, yeah, so natural and like kind of, I don't know if you want to call it serendipitous, but there's just something that where it
Yeah.
just happens, and then now you have a podcast together and you
Yeah.
continue sharing your love for food.
Yeah, it's really, and really what the kind of other piece of that that's really interesting is I had another woman call me one day and she said, "I heard you work for so and so, and he was the hardest boss I've ever had. So I'm just going to hire you like sight unseen and have you cook for me." And she became one of my really good clients too. And she also gifted me to one of her friends, or to
Mm.
actually her sister-in-law. And her sister-in-law then put me up for a job working on retreats. And
Ah.
I was hired for this series of 3 healing retreats. And once I started having meetings about like how many, how many people would be participating, how many people I would be cooking for, I really realized like this is too much for me alone to
Individually,
do.
yeah.
And so I brought Sonia on to help me with that
Mm.
project. And that project really, that was when we were together in the kitchen, 15 hours a day.
Hours, yeah.
And that is really what led us to our podcast too. So
Mm.
it's like these sort of steps. It's like none of this happened overnight,
Yeah.
like even just becoming a personal chef. It's like that kind of started when I was watching cooking shows and
Right, right.
tearing out recipes, and it, sort of one step leads to the next. And
Yeah.
it's funny, I never thought that I would be a podcaster, but I think what's great about what we do is we really share tips and recipes that we like that really help home cooks.
Yeah.
And there's so much food media. People talk about restaurants, and restaurants
Mm.
really important, and that's an exciting space to be in.
Yeah.
But home cooking is like a place that I think really there's so much potential to help people.
Yeah, yeah, it's so much more accessible, and I think there is a real I love the mission behind what you both do. Um,
Thank you.
and especially now that we're in like the summertime, there's a lot, I'm sure that's like seasonal. I kind of want to talk about that and pick your brain a bit about like if it's during this time of year, what are some good foods that people can be looking for? Maybe especially if they're going to like farmers markets and we're thinking about produce, vegetables, and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's great about this time of year is that, Mother Nature kind of gives you exactly what you need. And so
Yeah.
if you think about the foods that are available in the summer, like corn, tomatoes,
Mm.
watermelon, mint, these are all really, there's a lot of like, they're there to hydrate you and to cool you down when
Mm.
when the weather is really hot. And then if
Yeah.
you think about what's available in the winter, like potatoes and carrots and like root
Mm.
vegetables, it's all there to like warm you up. And
Yeah.
so what's great about the summer is that I think even if you live in a place that is cold in the winter, everyone has a farmer's market in the summer. And we one of the things that Sonia and I have done recently is we've recorded episodes about like a whole episode dedicated to cooking tomatoes, a whole episode
Mm.
dedicated to what you can make from what you've bought at the farmer's market, a
Yeah.
whole episode dedicated to like the strawberry recipes that we really like. And so, one of the recipes that we just shared on our farmer's market episode was it's called a zucchini rice gratin,
Ooh.
which it's actually it's a very old recipe from like 2008 in Gourmet Magazine, which no longer publishes. But I saved all these
Yeah.
recipes. And it's basically you just like if you come home from the farmer's market and you have like some zucchini and you have some tomatoes, you roast them
Mm.
separately. You combine them with like a tiny bit of rice, a little bit of olive oil, a lot of Parmesan cheese, and you cook it together. And it's a casserole
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
but it's something that you can make that's vegetarian, plant forward, and incredibly seasonal. And it also
Yeah.
doesn't take that much time, you
Yeah,
know?
it sounds very simple. You were able to explain it to me right now in just in a couple of seconds.
Yeah, yeah, and that's part of what we do. Like on our strawberry episode, we did share like if you come across those really special berries, like
Yeah.
don't do too much to them. But one of the recipes that I'm really loving from that episode is actually a drink recipe. It's a
Oh,
non-alcoholic drink,
yeah,
and it's a
matcha.
strawberry hibiscus limeade.
Oh, that sounds delicious.
It's so refreshing. It's by this recipe developer named Millie Peartree, and she released it for the New York Times. So I don't know if you
Mm,
use like recipe apps, but one of the apps that I use a lot is the New York Times recipe app.
okay.
And so you brew some hibiscus tea, which is also a really beautiful color.
Yeah.
And then you add some mint to that too. So you sort of steep like mint and hibiscus
Mm,
together. You add some fresh lime juice. You add like a strawberry puree, which is basically just like strawberries from the farmer's market. Throw it in your blender. Add maybe a little bit of sugar,
yeah.
and then you serve that cold. And one of the tips that she offers when I tested this recipe, I probably wouldn't have done this, but she says if you make pineapple juice ice cubes and serve it with pineapple juice ice
Oh.
cubes, like, this drink is good alone, but if you put these pineapple juice ice cubes in as they melt, it just gets sweeter and better. And like, I
Mm,
completely agree. I made this for a lunch that I did a few weeks ago. Like, I catered a lunch, and I
yeah.
also made this for like a group of friends, and everyone kind of went wild over the pineapple juice ice cubes. But it's basically just pineapple juice from the grocery store.
Frozen.
It's not,
Yeah.
yeah, you just freeze it.
Oh, that's
So,
such a great tip. I love that.
yeah,
Perfect for
perfect
summertime.
for summertime. Again, it's like hydrating.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned that you use like the New York Times recipe app. What other kind of sources do you reference? And then when you're creating your own recipes, like what is your process like?
That's such a good question. So, what you actually are asking a question that one of our listeners wrote in about or
Ah,
called. We have a hotline where people call, like basically my answering machine,
love
and
it. Yeah.
leave messages. And this listener called and she said, she said, like, I use a spreadsheet to kind of keep track of my
Mm,
recipes, but some of my friends use like binders and some
mhm,
of my friends use cookbooks. And I think one of the ideas that Sonia and I are always trying to share is that there isn't one way to do anything. Like,
mm.
there's not one way to cook rice. We all know that. There's
Yeah.
not one
Yeah.
way to make a salad. We all know that. But I think when you're kind of alone in your kitchen,
Mm,
you forget to trust yourself. And so, I use many different ways of like, of keeping track of my recipes. I have a lot of cookbooks. We interview a lot of cookbook authors on our podcast,
yeah.
and we get a lot of great ideas from those conversations too. But I still keep all of these, I keep all of these like pulled pages of recipes
Yeah.
because I'm much more of a visual cook.
Mm.
And, there are apps that you can use, like the New York Times app. One of our other listeners, who actually wrote into us from Portland, like the Portland area, he uses this app called Paprika that kind of like helps keep you organized. So I think it's just a matter of finding what works best for you. I mean,
Yeah.
do you keep recipes or do you have cookbooks? Like, do you use any of those?
Oh my gosh, I am such a functional cook. I don't it's like I kind of make the same things over and over, and it's a little bit of just things that I've read or, mostly stored just in my head. So
Yeah, yes. I mean, that's great. I mean, that's also I appreciate that you said that because that's why I started cooking in the first place. Is
Mm,
because it's really like a space of creativity for me.
yeah.
And, clients would say to me like, "How did you make that?" And I would say, I don't know. I would never write down my recipes,
It's
but
just kind of by feel
it
and
was always
knowledge.
by feel. And I'm one of the things that I've realized through my friendship with Sonia is I'm a good recipe curator. Like if I read
Mm,
a recipe, I can usually decide like this is a well-written recipe or I can rely on my instincts to kind of fix it as I
mm.
go.
Yeah, yeah.
But I was never really a recipe writer. And Sonia's actually been writing recipes and writing articles and sharing recipes for a very long time. She's also a cookbook author. She wrote a cookbook called Braids, which is one of my favorite cookbooks. It's aside from being friends with her, it's the recipes really work, the pictures
Yeah.
are really beautiful, and it's like a very personal cookbook. It really shares the story of her growing up in the Pacific Northwest and spending time in Los Angeles and Southern California, and
Yeah.
then also moving back. And she lives in Portland now. But um, I've started writing recipes for our Substack. We also have a
Mm,
Substack, and we share recipes every week. And she's really helped me standardize those recipes.
yeah.
And in the fall when we launched our Substack, we were offering a lot. We were offering a soup recipe each week,
Mhm.
and now because it's summer, we are offering a salad recipe each week.
Mm,
And our salads are really more like make ahead, prep ahead. And
yeah.
so one salad that I just released is called the 10. It's called the I think it's 10 ingredient crunch.
Ooh.
I'm forgetting it's a 7 layer. Oh, it's a 10 layer crunch salad. And it's
Oh.
based on a recipe or a salad that I grew up with called the 7 layer salad. And it's a very Midwest kind of salad. So you make it in like a glass bowl and you kind of layer all these different ingredients. And it
Mm.
has iceberg lettuce and thawed frozen peas and bacon.
Oh.
And, I really never liked that salad because, 1, I feel like thawed frozen peas are kind of mushy,
Yeah.
and I feel like when you put bacon in a salad and you stick it in the fridge for a while, that it gets, like, kind of,
Ooh, yeah, yeah.
it just I don't
The
like the
texture.
texture of
Yeah.
it, and so I set out to develop a recipe that was a little bit more modern and more of the way I eat, so it's
Mm.
vegetarian, but it's a really interesting salad 'cause you can serve it in a glass bowl so you can see each of the layers, and so
Oh,
I
beautiful.
did like cucumbers and sweet peppers and
Mm.
carrots. And then there's like a creamy dressing. And, you can put that in the fridge for like 1 to 2 days.
And it stays. Yeah.
And it stays really crunchy. And
Mm.
then you kind of have it's almost like a ranch salad. It has a lot of
Yeah,
ranchy
yeah. It
vibes.
has
And
almost like a chopped salad-ness to it.
it
Yeah.
has a chopped saladness to it, but you can prep it ahead.
Yeah.
And when you pull it straight from the fridge in the summer, it's also really cold. And so there's
Mm.
something really refreshing about it too. So
Yeah.
I just served that at a dinner party that I hosted at my
Mm.
house, and my friends were like, "What is this?" And also, it's
Yeah.
so good. And but it's also a great thing that you can take with you if you're going to go to like a potluck or go to
Mm.
the beach, keep it in your cooler. You can make it in a casserole dish if you wanted to. It's a
Yeah.
little bit sexier if you put it in like a footed, like basically a trifle dish,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's very you can see all the layers and it's really
Yes,
beautiful. Oh,
exactly.
that's amazing. I
Yeah.
mean, speaking of like the summer dinner parties, do you have any other like recipe tips for someone who's like prepping ahead of time?
Yeah, I think if you're hosting, what I would offer is like to ask yourself questions about like what are your strengths and
Mm,
then, and what are the things that you want to do? Like why are you having the party? Is it
mm,
because you want to try a recipe? Is it because you want to get together with your friends? Like what is the reason why you're having the party? And then what what can you do ahead of time? Like
mm,
if you haven't hosted for a while, and you need to like wash your wine glasses, don't wait till the day of the party because then
mm,
you'll just be like frantically running around doing all these things. So, can you do that a couple of days in advance?
mm.
Can you even, do you have a dedicated dining room? I don't have a dedicated dining room, so, I don't set the table ahead of time,
Mm.
but I usually will put some of those things out so I kind of know where they're all at. Set the table a few hours in advance if you can. If one of your friends is really good at drinks or wine, can you outsource that?
Mm.
Or if you have a trusted friend that can make a salad and that's not your jam, can you do that too? So I think it's like it depends on each cook,
Mm.
and I don't do you host at your house or
I
are you
don't
host?
very
No.
much. I'm not I'm very much the person that attends the potluck and maybe last minute brings like a store-bought pie.
Yeah,
But
but
I
that's a good.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. Come back next week for part 2 of our conversation. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Living Well or Trying to. If you don't already, please follow or subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. It means so much to me that my new episodes will just pop up in your feed. And if you like what you're hearing and seeing, please leave a rating and review. It means so much for a small content creator like myself in this world that is so saturated now to be able to have some feedback from all of you. As always, I so appreciate you. Thank you for lending me your ears, your eyes, your presence, and your attention, especially in today's world when there are so many other places that you could be giving it to. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, and I hope to catch you on another episode.